Hey, this is a video on why you can't just trust your bank account in your business in order to make good financial decisions. I was actually sitting down on a sales call last week with a gentleman who runs a $17 million a year construction company. And I was sitting there and I asked him a simple question. I said, "Hey, how do you typically make financial decisions?" And I asked this to all of our prospects, and I get a wide range of answers sometimes to how detailed they are and what kind of spreadsheets they're using to actually one of the more common answers I get, which is I just look at the bank account. And if there's more money in there than I'm expecting, then I feel like I can spend that money. And sometimes I look at it and there's less in there. And I feel like I need to obviously not spend as much money. And, we went through this and it's not just this gentleman alone. It just resonated with me that I thought, this is something that we see constantly popping up. And you might be like me when I first, was running my own business. I assumed if you got to a certain level of revenue a year, you probably had all these things figured out and you wouldn't be operating from just your bank account. But the reality is that the habits that we form early on in our business tend to stick with us. And we've seen this in our company as well, right? We build a habit and you stick with that habit. And if it works for you and you don't get, it doesn't cause you severe consequences, you keep running with it. And so the first thing to say here is whatever he's doing doesn't necessarily mean it's wrong. What I do think is interesting though is, hey, as things get more complex, it's really, really risky to just look at your bank account and try to make decisions based off the number that you see in your bank account. And I want to give a really simple example. So let's say you're a service-based business. So for example, in our company, which is one I'm often going to refer to, right, we provide fractional CFO services or financial coaching services, and we collect payment upfront, right? So there's different ways that you can pay. But in theory, right, we're collecting at least a certain amount to get things started. And we have to look at, even though I collect that money, a certain portion of that is going to go to labor costs, right? To our actual fractional CFOs that are working with our clients. And I might not pay that out until month 2 or month 3. Let's say, for example, a good example is someone could sign up with us for a 6-month fractional CFO agreement. And they might pay for those 6 months upfront at a discount, right? We might say, hey, we could get 10% off if you pay for all 6 months upfront. Helps us with cash flow, helps them if they're in a situation where, let's say it's the end of the year and it could be used as a deduction towards the end of the year. And so let's say we do that, right? We collect a good chunk of change upfront. Well, I don't actually have all of that money as cash flow, as liquid cash flow for me to use. Technically it's there and I could go spend it. And if I look at the bank account, it shows I have X amount more in my bank account than I did before. But the problem with that is I owe the labor costs on those services over the next 6 months, right? So let's say, for example, it's, I don't know, $3,500 a month to work with us times 6 months. That's $21,000. And someone pays, whatever the 10% is, let's just call it $19,000, right? Or $18,000 that someone says, hey, I'll pay up front for that and I'm going to give it to you now. Well, if I know that my labor costs per month to have a fractional CFO client is $1,000, right? $6,000 of that 18 isn't mine. That's got to be set aside into a separate place, ideally into a separate account, right? So this is what makes it really easy is we move that into a separate account. And that way we hold that for and we label that account. It's literally a separate checking account or account within account within an account. It's tough to say. That we actually set aside just for labor costs, right? And so that way we know, even though we collected that, let's just say 18,000 in this case, 6,000 of that has to go into another account that's not ours to touch, right? We can't touch that. It's going to get paid out over the next 6 months, assuming those services will be delivered. And so when I look at my bank account, I can take that 6,000 out. And now what would have looked like 18,000 higher is only 12,000 higher. And this hasn't even taken into account things like what we'd need for overhead and all of that. Just simple stuff of looking at this and going, hey, if we didn't have that separate account, we'd be looking at this and going, I have $18,000 more in my account. I can go spend that right now. We could go reinvest into something. When really, actually, 6,000 of that already has to be paid for the services that will be delivered later. And we see this so much, especially in the trades businesses, any kind of professional services where you might collect a large sum upfront and your bank account shows, boom, a huge influx, sometimes hundreds of thousands of dollars up to millions of dollars in in cash that comes in. And they look at that and they feel so happy. They're like, we're on top of the world. We've got so much cash on hand. But the reality is, we have to then look at over the next 6 months, for example, they might be paying out whether that's to vendors, whether that's for material costs, supply costs, labor costs, that isn't actually going to be there to be used. And if we don't look at that and we don't approach that from the front end going, hey, I've got a plan for that, then what happens is you say, hey, well, I've got 2 million in cash in my bank, whatever, I can afford whatever I need to. But then it starts eroding away. And when those things come due, when you need to pay those vendors, when you need to buy the supplies, when material cost rises, right? All of a sudden, all of that is gone. And this is where we find so many clients before they come to us get in this position, and then they're pulling from lines of credit, and they're having to go seek out more debt opportunities to pay back, right? They're robbing Peter to pay Paul. It's a thing we hear all the time. I just feel like I'm robbing Peter to pay Paul. And the reality is it stems from poor planning. It stems more often than not from just not being prepared in terms of when I get these lump sums of cash, I am not prepared and I'm not thinking ahead of time of where do I need to store that so I'm not tempted to touch it, knowing that it's technically already spent, right? So for us, we view that money as already spent, even though it's still somewhere in our bank account. It's just spent in our minds because it's labor costs for the services we've already contracted. And this is where it gets so dangerous to look at just your bank account, right? Unless you only have, realistically, unless you have just very few transactions and you know exactly what days of the month those transactions happen, it is so difficult as you're scaling a business into a complex level, into the millions of dollars, into the tens of millions of dollars, to know every single day of the month when transactions are going to hit so you can actually see and understand where your actual cash on hand is at any given moment. And so I really have just felt compelled to want to share about this because it's something that I've seen not just once, not twice, but honestly with a good percentage of our clients before they come to us, they find themselves in this position where they're saying, hey, I've just been making decisions based off my bank account. And if you look at just the bank account, it's often a place of deceit, meaning the number there isn't actually the number that you have that you can play with that is feels like that's actually what is cash on hand. And so, one of the things that we do is we actually look at it's sort of like a profit first style system. It's a little more complicated and just nuanced than that. But one of the things that we look at is, hey, how do we organize our cash flow as money comes in? We have a process at the end of every month called the wealth waterfall, where we look at things from the previous month and we say, okay, what actually is cash on hand that we have? And how do we separate the money that we've collected from revenue so far this month? Where does that have to go? What is already technically spent that isn't going to be spent right now, but it was collected for services that's going to need to be spent on labor over the next 2, 3, 6, 7, 12 months, right? And how do we set that aside? So if you're interested in that process, if you're like, hey, I wanted to see how you guys do the quote unquote wealth waterfall process, how you're organizing accounts and structures, just in the comments, put waterfall, and I'll send over a training that goes through exactly how we run our wealth waterfall process and how we're able to organize this. So that way we're never reliant on just looking at our bank account. And if you've liked this, please smash the like button. Would love for you to subscribe to the channel as well. Be dropping more content around business finances, about how to organize your stuff, and essentially how to think like a CFO in your company. See ya.